Hello everyone and welcome back to my Magic the Gathering Commander deck list reviews. So this is a series where I take my own personal decks or those submitted by users and break them down to sort of their core mechanics. So I'll look at the commander, kind of what the deck's trying to generally do, kind of give my critiques, and wrap it all up with my feedback at the end. If you want to power up your own decks, make sure to head up to the top link in the description to get your decks personally reviewed by me. Besides that, let's get into today's episode. So this one isn't technically my deck or user submitted. It is a deck that is directly from Wizards of the Coast. So this is the newest Everyone's Invited Precon that is going for, I think, about $200 and will be released soon on their website, the Secret Lair website. They've done quite a few of these before. I know the first one's pretty infamous, the Heads I Win Tells You Lose. I think they've done, this is like their fifth one or around there. And they all have kind of varying levels of quality to them. And also varying levels of card quality, specifically, not even just deck construction. And this one is very middling for me. Not only is it one of the more expensive ones they've done, only barely reaching, card price versus what they're doing. You can see kind of down here that $225 is about what you're paying for the deck if you were to build it yourself versus the $200 that you get for buying it directly from Wizards. That being said, there are some special tokens and you're getting some specialty card arts for 10 of the cards. I don't have anything like that on here since they aren't technically released yet, but this is the full deck, all of the same cards in the same deck list. So we're kind of going to go through it, talk about what the deck's trying to do, and then we're going to kind of switch into the ins and outs. So this is more of a critique of a Wizard-specific deck. I'm kind of curious to see what they're going to do with this in the future and how it really plays out. But for now, I think this is a fairly cool deck. So this deck specifically, I don't think it's quite bracket 3. I would consider bracket 2. I don't think there's even any game changers in here. It's tribal, or shapeshifter tribal, whatever you want to call it. Basically, Morophon here, our commander, is a 7-mana 6/6 shapeshifter, of course, with Changeling. So Changeling is kind of the name of the game here. So Changeling is a keyword that says this card has every creature type. So that doesn't have to be a creature. There are some Changeling instants and sorceries and whatever. It just gives that card every creature type. So cards that specifically say, oh, when you cast this creature type, do something, this will trigger, which is kind of the main point of the deck. But when he enters, you choose a creature type, and spells of the chosen type cost Wooburg less to cast. So if you got, the first sliver or something like that, something with Wooburg in its cost, and you name sliver, that will cost 0 to cast. And there's a few combos you could do with that. Nothing specifically in this deck or any of the upgrades, just because it doesn't work very well when you're going Changeling Tribal. And it also gives, the Lord effect gives creatures that +1/+1. But basically what we're trying to do here is get a whole bunch of creatures that have every creature type. That way you can kind of pick and choose all the best tribal cards and put them into one deck. So, there's a lot of different things in here that care about specific creature types. We've got quite a lot. There's 24 cards in the deck just by itself that have Changeling or deal with Changelings, giving everything creature types. So quite a few cards specifically that turn on a lot of our abilities here. We got a good amount of ramp, 13 cards. It's a little finicky, and same thing with our interaction. Not a whole lot of interaction in the deck, and I'm even kind of stretching here with Feline Sovereign. It can destroy stuff when stuff deals combat damage, but just not a lot in the way of that. But specifically down here in our tribal stuff, we got 19 cards, specifically creatures, really, that have some sort of creatures get this, creatures get that. So a lot of it's keyworded. So like Cloud Treader Sliver gives slivers, flying and haste. And that is kind of a big thing you can go, and that's not what I did with this deck. You can very much go in the direction of slivers, because slivers are kind of just a tribe in and of itself that care about each other. It's kind of another focused tribal deck where they say all slavers get this, all slavers get that. So you could very much pump more into that, and there are I think 3 or 4 slivers in the deck just because those are the good ones, and it's a good tribe to have around and very much benefits from the Changeling plan. But that's not something you have to go for, not something that I kind of went with. But even like stuff, Venger's Zendikar is kind of cool. When it enters, creates plants, and landfall puts +1/+1 counters on each plant you control. That's kind of nice. Bruce Tarl and the Kinsbale Cavalier both give whatever creature type double strike, which is kind of cool. One of the better ones. There's some kind of not as good ones, like Kiri gives plants and tree fluix +2/+0. We don't really care about that. Of course, the Slavers, like I said, giving Slavers to be able to tap for mana is pretty good. Tender Shoot Dryad, sort of a long-standing favorite for a lot of people. Each upkeep creates a 1/1, and then once you have ascended, gives all your Saplings +2/+2, which, you know, is pretty easy to do very early on. You know, Magda's pretty cool, so when we attack or tap any of our creatures, if they're dwarves, we get treasure tokens, and then we can tutor for stuff. So there's quite a few things that it's trying to do in here. And we even have, you know, Bitter Blossom and like Coat of Arms, so some kind of cool stuff. Like I do like Double Down in here. It's kind of an interesting card. Whenever you cast an Outlaw spell, you copy it. So when, you know, we're casting creatures that are, you know, assassins, mercenary, pirates, rogues, and warlocks, which are outlaws, they could do a few different things. There's even like some of the old Zendikar Rising party mechanic where, you know, a party is a specific amount of creature types like warriors and clerics and that sort of thing. That, you know, some of those cards are kind of good because, of course, all of our creatures that have Changeling are a full party in themselves, which is kind of cool. So there's you know, a lot going on here, and I think it has some fun synergy. But honestly, like, even our card advantage is kind of weak. Like, I'm kind of stretching it too here with Realm Walker and Risen Reef. Even Tazri's not super good. You know, very few actual card draw spells, and Black Market Connections is, you know, pulling a lot of weight in this deck because it makes changelings, it draws cards and creates treasure tokens, so it's doing a lot here. I do like the board wipes are pretty cool. Raise the Palisade, it's very cool to see some of the first reprints of these Lord of the Rings Commander cards, because I didn't know, you know, how long that license is going to last for them to be able to print these specifically. Kind of nice with that. You know, Raise the Palisade was a really, really cool one from one of the pre-cons that I'm glad got a reprint because it was kind of getting pricey, and even still kind of is holding a bit of a price where you can just bounce a whole bunch of stuff. Kindred Dominance is definitely overcosted, but it does, you know, choose a creature type and destroy everything that isn't that type, so that's kind of nice. It's something you can learn to any black tribal deck, or, you know, a tribal deck that contains black. So there's quite a few things going on here. And I do have to say, one of the weakest parts of this deck is definitely the land base. I really, really don't like tap lands. I feel there's too many good lands that come in untapped, or that are just better tap lands, like the tri lands, that have even gotten fairly cheap, that I don't really like running a lot of these in here. The only thing I will say that's kind of cute in here are all of the Lorwyn lands that you can reveal whatever card type from Lorwyn from your hand to have them enter untapped as dual lands. If you know, just keep some sort of changeling in your hand, you're able to just have these kind of untapped, which is really cool. Another Lord of the Rings card, it's a tri-land that you can reveal Tree Folk to have it enter untapped. It's pretty cool. So a few things here and there, like even Mutavault, I really like. You know, you can pay 1 mana and it becomes a creature with every creature type. World Tree is kind of cool, and there's also Realm Breaker in here, where its final ability allows you to pay double Wooburg and tap and sack it to search for any number of god cards, put them on the battlefield and shuffle. So a lot of times you're searching most of your creatures on the battlefield, but even still, trying to get double Wooburg is really, really hard. So this isn't something that really works all the time. It does also, if you at least control 6 lands, it gives you mana fixing, which is kind of nice. You know, this is kind of a generically bad tap land, but with those extra effects, especially with that middle effect of, you know, we're in a Wooburg deck and we're not using a super crazy mana base, especially if you're just running, you know, out of the box pre-con, it's a nicer land in the deck than a lot of them. Heading over to our outs, we have 33 cards that we are taking out of the deck, which, you know, is a third of the deck. That's quite a lot and seems like quite a lot, but most of it are the lands. Like I said earlier, I don't really like the Triumphs. They're not very good, and I don't really even like these Pain lands. They're all right, but when you're running so many of them, you know, it very much can damage you at a certain point, you know, to a point where it becomes crippling. I don't really like this in here. There's too many other good dual lands that we can just run, which, you know, is a lot of the in stuff. So 14 of the cards in here, so about half of that. We're only switching out, you know, around 20 cards of actual non-land cards in the deck. Also, I really don't know why they put in the Signet lands. These suck. You know, not only they don't do anything turn 1, which is really bad, but they are really horrible mana fixers unless you're in the 2 colors that they are, because, you know, we're a Wooburg deck and we're not always going to need the same color combinations, and so being forced into only having Simic or Gruul or whatever is really, really bad, so I made sure to take those out as well. Artifacts, I really, really like Coat of Arms. It's a really fun card, but it just backfires so much in this deck that it's going to kill you more times than not. So Coat of Arms is a 5-mana artifact that says each creature gets +1/+1 for each other creature in play that shows a creature type with it. So it sounds really good until you realize this is a symmetrical effect. So it's each creature, not each creature you control, each creature on the battlefield, including your opponents, get +1/+1 for each other creature in general that shares a creature type with it, including your own. So this means if one person anywhere has a changeling that is every creature type, that card is going to share types with every other creature on the battlefield. So it'll at least buff everything and get it buffed by everything else. So that becomes really bad when you have 3 or 4 or 5 changelings, because you're buffing your stuff, which is nice, but most of the time you're buffing your opponent's stuff even more, or to the same extent where you're not really getting much value. You're not getting any extra power on top of your opponents that you would want from this card. And like I said, if anyone's playing like a straight up, like if someone's playing Elf Ball or Dragons or something, this is probably just going to kill you. I don't even like running in a lot of tribal decks anyway, because it is, very hard to play in the right situations. But for this deck especially, it's really not a good card. I know it's like one of the especially, it's got that crazy art, one of the cool cards for the deck, but it's really, really bad in the pre-con and for a Changeling Tribal deck. And I talked about Realm Breaker. It's kind of a cool one. Again, it has the ability where you can pay 10 mana, tap it, sacrifice it, go tutor for Praetors this time instead of gods, which is interesting. It's a little worse, of course, on an artifact that's easier to blow up. The mana cost is a little easier to get to, but even then, 10 mana, for World Tree, it's 11 because you're also having to sacrifice and tap that land, is not very good. There's a lot of other ways to win for 10, 11 mana, and this, its primary ability of, sort of ramping you a little bit where you have opponent mill cards and, get lands back, is really, you can't really rely on it at all. You may not hit anything. It's just kind of a bad ramp source for 3 mana, and we're in green, so this is really not what we're looking for, which is another reason I took it out. Just a lot better stuff we can run in the deck, even if it has some sort of weird, fringe synergy. Same thing with Bitter Blossom. It's really cool that it's a tribal enchantment fairy. That's one of the few that tribal cards that are not creatures. I think it's really cool. If you were doing something that was more along the lines of trying to make sure you had more tribal or kindred or whatever cards in the deck, where you're caring about delirium or number of card types like Tarmogoyf type thing, I could get running this card still. But really, it's not doing anything. It's making you fairies. It's Bitter Blossom. It's doing the thing it's doing, but I feel like for Commander anymore, it's just not very good unless it's in a very specific, fairy tribal deck like a Layla or something. But for our Changeling Tribal deck, this isn't really giving us much extra value. So kind of just not worth it. The Bears of Littjara, again, is just a very inefficient card. It makes shapeshifters and pumps shapeshifters, but honestly, paying 3 mana to get a 2/2, very bad for when that's all it does. And then it sits around. If you get to the next turn, yes, you can give all your creatures base power 4/4, which is pretty okay, still not a really good thing. And even the last one doesn't really matter either. It's not a really good card, and it's very, very slow. I don't like most sagas anyway, because they're really slow unless every single one of the chapters is worth something, and this is definitely not. For instance, I took out, there are a lot of cards in the main deck that are just changelings to be changelings. I think there's even one of them that's just a 2 mana 2/2 vanilla creature with changeling, like very, very bad. And there's so many other cards that they didn't put in the deck that can be changelings, that can give our creatures creature types, that, I was able to take out some of these kind of worse cards. Like, it's kind of cool that this is a changeling instant, but it's not really worth it when, already the deck didn't have a lot of good interaction spells anyway. Like, there's no swords, there's no path, there's no anything like that. So kind of taking this out for better stuff later. Stick Together is kind of a cool one. Each player chooses a party from among creatures they control and sacrifices the rest. So you get to choose 4 your creatures. Usually you're going to have a full party, so you get to keep 4. Other people may have 1 or 2 creatures they keep, but even then it's kind of an inefficient board wipe. I don't really like it. If you're paying 5 mana for this and maybe keeping a creature or 2, it's all right in the deck, but honestly, I'd rather be running like a Toxic Deluge or something. And we have added a card that I think is just strictly better than this in the deck. That is a board wipe. Kindred Dominance, I like it as a board wipe, but it has exact same problems as the other one, where it's 7 mana. That's just way too much. I don't like paying more than 5 mana for any of my board wipes, and even 5 is kind of steep anymore with, the amount of value, unless it's something like Farewell, where you can pay 6 and it's modal and does a bunch of stuff for you. Just not really what we're looking for. And along the similar lines, cultivate, you know, I added some different ramp cards in here. I don't like these anymore. I really try to run the specific land tutor packages with like 3 visits, nature's lore, sky shroud claim, because they're just strictly better in getting lands, especially, you know, it's not as big of a deal if you're running monocolored or, you know, dual colored, where, you know, you can grab basics and, you know, you're not specifically needing certain types of mana. You don't need a mana fix as much. But for a 5-color deck, those I definitely throw in there. I don't think I've thrown in 3 visits because I'm trying to, you know, keep the budget a little tight. It's not super tight, you know, especially because we need a good amount of lands. The lands I put in are all the slow lands, you know, where lands that say it enters untapped as long as you control 2 other lands, and those have become, you know, pretty cheap as of late with all the reprints and standard sets, which is kind of cool. But for this, I just really wanted better ramp in the deck, and we had a lot of ramp anyway, a lot of stuff that makes our stuff produce mana, so it's not really necessary. And all these creatures, so these are either bad changelings, like I said, the Imposter of the Sixth Pride doesn't do anything, is just a changeling. A 2-mana 3/1, pretty bad. Skeletor Changeling is not much better. You know, these are just kind of bad changeling cards that don't do much for us, and then kind of bad tribal cards. So this is whenever a dog deals common damage to a player, create a food and investigate. I don't really like it's okay, but not super good, you know, just not something I really want to run in the deck, because, you know, that's not a super great payoff for getting in combat damage, and a lot of times that's a hard ask anyway, but to just create something we have to pay more mana to use is kind of bad. Kiri, like I said earlier, plants and tree evokes getting +2/+0 is a pretty bad Lord effect, and being a post-combat pre-main, you get a whatever creature type from your graveyard to your hand. Again, pretty bad. There's a lot of other cards. We're in Wooburg, so we can be pretty, you know, open with the cards that we want. We can be way more efficient with our card selection because we have access to the whole color pie. So just, again, not really an efficient card. Harper Recruiter, again, this is required to attack to get its trigger, which is really bad on a 3/1 flyer. You know, it's just too slow and not giving us a lot. You leave the top 4 and you may reveal 1 card of each, you know, of the party types and put them into your hand. That's not doing us much good. But Bloodline Pretender is kind of cool in decks that are restricted on color identity for changelings, but we're not, so kind of just bad. Feline Sovereign doesn't do a lot. So these, you know, the whole thing here is these just aren't doing a whole lot for us, so that's kind of why we're taking them out. Just kind of weak cards that don't synergize as well as I'd like them to. And of course, like I said, upgrading the mana base. So nothing crazy, you know, taking out a few things here and there. Some of them are even, you know, pretty good cards, but just not really what we're looking for. So here are the cards we are putting into the deck. So a lot more stuff that's, you know, based on what we're looking for and really taking advantage of the changeling stuff. So one of my favorites is Zombie Native Scroll. So they just got reprinted, which is awesome because it was really expensive for a while. You can tap an untapped wizard you control to draw a card. So that's really cool. She comes down, can immediately tap herself to draw a card. And then of course all your changelings can tap to draw cards. Just really good card advantage engine. It's very much repeatable, you know, every single one of your turns because all your creatures on tap, you can do it again. Very cool. Changeling Outcast, kind of nice. You know, we have some Lord effects, so maybe the unblockable is kind of, you know, relevant, but mostly a 1-mana 1/1. I tried to have a lot of those in there that, you know, we can just kind of turn on our Changeling stuff right away. Even though it doesn't do a whole lot in the deck, besides that, it's, you know, just having Changeling is good enough at the mana cost that it is to kind of run and make sure we have our stuff online. Herald of Hoofbeats is a really cool precon card from the March of the Machines Knight precon, so it has horsemanship and gives other knights we control horsemanship, which is a mechanic that basically just says as long as your opponents don't have horsemanship, they can't block. So it's just unblockable most of the time because it's kind of an old Portal for Kingdoms mechanic that no one really uses. It's like Shadow, one of those type of things, where it doesn't really matter. It's basically unblockable for all your creatures, which is really cool. Knight Exemplar gives other knights +1/+1 and indestructible. So that's awesome. Indestructible is kind of what we're looking for here. Gives us a lot of extra protection for our board, which is really sweet. Omo, I'm really surprised this didn't get into the precon because it's the perfect card for this deck. So when it enters or attacks, you put an everything counter on each of up to 1 target land and 1 target creature. So lands you control with everything counters on them are every land type in addition to its other types, and then each non-land creature with every counter and everything counter on it is every creature type. So basically it puts counters on stuff when it attacks or enters. Lands are every land type, creatures are every creature type. So this kind of gives our stuff Changeling, and it allows, you know, stuff like our non-changelings to become changelings, which is really cool. And a repeatable way to do that at that. Even coming down, having it enter and, you know, put something on it is really good by itself for the stuff that, you know, like I said, aren't changelings necessarily, or stuff that we really need to get to changelings. Or if we have a board wipe on hand that we really want to make sure that some of our creatures live, we can kind of target them with this. She's just kind of a nice thing that I think is really necessary for this changeling deck. I like Valiant Changeling. This is really cool because this costs one less for each creature type among creatures you control. So, you know, I don't even know how many creature types are in the game, but as long as you control one Changeling, this is 2 mana instead of 7, which is awesome. And then, you know, it's a 2 mana Changeling with not much else going on. But the fact that it's a 2 mana 3/3 with double strike, you know, those stats are pretty good. And so most of the time we're turning this on, and it's a fairly good creature for what it is. And like really the biggest thing here is the changeling thing, and being reduced by other changelings is very nice. And our kind of biggest one here is Voja. So Voja is just kind of one of the strongest tribal cards in general. It's got Vigilance, Trample, Ward 3. It's a 5/5, and it says when it attacks, put an X +1/+1 counters on each creature you control, or X the number of elves you control, and then you draw a card for each wolf you control. So this is kind of bonkers. Even just with Voja by itself is kind of cool, but the fact that we're going to have a good amount of changelings, like if you got 4 changelings on the battlefield, you're giving all your stuff +4/+4. So just 16 counters by itself, and then those 4 things are also elves. They draw you cards. So just an amazing card for the deck, really hard to get around. Just by itself is pretty good, but it affords us so much value that I was another card kind of surprised not to see in the pre-con, because it just does so much for specifically what we're going for. Speaking of, I really like Caterin Summon. So this is a 1 mana tutor. Says search your library for a mercenary card, reveal that card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So it is literally just a tutor, demonic tutor for most creatures in our library, that because they're changelings, they are going to be mercenaries, which is really cool. Again, kind of just a surrogate for turning on our changeling stuff, you know, tutor it to hand whenever we need it, or if we need a specific spell. Like there's quite a few changelings that do different things in the deck, so that's kind of nice to have on top of everything else. But I just thought it was kind of a fun synergy piece that I was, you know, I like adding this stuff in when I can, because you're not going to see Caterin Summons in pretty much any other type of deck. So it's cool to kind of show that here and for it to be really powerful where it is. And so this is the board wipe I added in, Crux of Fate. So just kind of strictly better. You do have to have only one. You can't choose the creature type that it targets, but again, we're going to have a lot of changelings most of the time, or we can make stuff specific creature types in the deck. 5 mana, you choose one, destroy all dragon creature or all dragons or all non-dragons. So most of the time this is great in a dragon deck because you destroy all non-dragons, and it's the same way here where we destroy everything that's not a dragon. Usually a one-sided board wipe for 5 mana instead of 7, like Kindred Dominance. Just kind of a strictly better board wipe. Exterminate is a really, really cool one in this deck as well. So this is sort of a mass destroy outlet. It's got Replicate, which is the biggest thing. You can tap an untapped Dalek you control. So of course, all of our changelings are going to be Daleks. We can help tap with them. So Replicate, you just copy it for each time you pay the Replicate cost. It's a destroy target creature. Its controller loses 3 life. So, you know, I feel like this spell is really good if you can even get 2. You know, if you can replicate it once or even twice, really is pretty good. Get a whole lot of extra value out of this card. You know, it's a really cool, weird Doctor Who card, again, sort of like the Caterin Summons, where wouldn't be good in most other instances, but it's really awesome for this deck. Same thing with Massive Appeal. So Distant Melody is a card that's in the main deck where you choose a creature type and you draw equal to the number of creatures you control of that type. Massive Appeal is pretty much the same thing. It's 1 less mana, and it just is specifically for humans, but again, where, you know, we have a lot of changelings in the deck, so we're drawing, you know, 3 mana. If you can get 3 cards out of it, I feel like that's the best rate, or a higher, of course. But around there, I think this is a really, really good draw spell. Just more of this kind of stuff, you know, make sure that we're getting the cards in hand we need. Nature's Lore, of course, like I said before. Same thing with Sky Shard Claim, where they tutor for forest cards. In the lands, I did add a few extra specifically forest-typed cards, just so we have an easier time tutoring for stuff when we need it. But there are also a few different, I think, basic force in the main deck as well. There's a few basics of each type in the main, which is nice for the cards because they are the Tango lands that care about our number of basics on the battlefield to enter untapped, but just a few extra things so we can make sure that we always hit stuff with both of these cards. And then one of my favorites I also really like for this deck is Patriarch's Bidding. So it's a mass reanimation for everyone, where each player chooses a creature type, and then each player returns all creature cards of a type chosen this way from their graveyard to the battlefield. So you can choose something. Usually, you know, you have 3 or 4 changelings, you might have an elf in your graveyard. You choose the elf, all the changelings get brought back as well. So a pretty good mass reanimation type thing. thing where you're getting a lot of, usually a lot more creatures than most other people are. Kind of, you want to be careful, of course, with any mastery animation, very much making sure you know what everyone's graveyard looks like beforehand, because, if someone's playing an elf deck or a knight deck or a dragon deck or something, they have a good amount of stuff. You want to make sure that you're always getting more value out of this than your opponents, but just one of the few ways we can kind of get a lot of stuff back for a relatively good cost. And then instance, there's not a lot I wanted to add in terms of interaction. A few things here and there, mostly Nature's Claim. I tried to run this in pretty much every green deck. It wasn't a really good interaction package for the main deck anyway. But this is a 1-mana destroy artifact or enchantment. It's just very efficient, like adding it to the deck. Mox Jasper is sort of a pretty big expense card to add in here. It's about $16 to $20 to add in. But the fact that it's usually just a 0-mana anything Mox in the deck, because, as long as you control a dragon, you can add 1 mana of any color, and of course running changelings that are going to be dragons. So, this is online most of the game, and it's really good turn 1 if you've got something like, a Changeling Outcast out, because you can immediately cast this Changeling Outcast after, playing a land and getting Mox Jasper online just from that. So very easy to turn on the deck, and kind of a cool, unique way of using this card rather than just playing it in the dragon deck that you normally would. Leyline of Transformation, so there's a few cards of this variety as well. There's a few in the main deck that I do like that they have in there, where you choose a creature type, and then all creatures you control are those types. The same is true for creature spells you control and creature cards that are on the battlefield. So this is really good. Like, you can name Mercenary, would be really cool with this card, to make any card in your deck tutorable with the Cater and Summons, because it's as well as on the battlefield, not on the battlefield. But what I really like with this one is it's a lane line, so you can have it, as long as it's in your opening hand, you can have it start on the battlefield at the beginning of the game. But even just paying the mana cost for it, it's worth it most times just to have that extra effect, which is really, really cool. And then sort of our surrogate for the coat of arms is Banner of Kinship. It's the same mana cost, and when it enters, you choose a creature type, and it enters the number of counters on it equal to the number of creatures you control the chosen type, and then creatures of the chosen type get +1/+1 for each fellowship counter on it. So, if you've got 5 changelings, you name whatever you want, zombie, enters with 5 counters, and then from then on, any creatures that are zombies get +5/+5. So this is sort of a non-symmetrical way to do this and still get a pretty good effect out of it. Usually this card, anyway, you're going to be wanting to play on the turn that you're able to attack, same thing with Coat of Arms anyway. So get this down when you have a good amount of creatures that all share a creature type, and then you swing in for a bunch of damage. But this way you aren't pumping your opponent's creatures, which is kind of the biggest thing with that. And then another pump effect that I just really like for these type of decks is Shared Animosity. So whenever a creature you control attacks, it gets +1/+0 until end of turn for each other attacking creature that shares a creature type with it. So you can, pump a bunch of your creatures depending on, if you got 4 changelings attacking, they all give each other +4/+0, which is really cool. Just a bunch of big faces you can swing in with just to get a bit of extra value off of that. And lastly, I kind of talked about it here, is our lands. So all of the slow lands I talked about, they're fairly cheap. Some of them are a little more expensive. I think only 1 or 2 of them are over $5. Most of them have just gotten a reprint in one of the commander decks, or just a main set, remastered set, what have you. And I do think out of any of the stuff that you could continue to upgrade, I would very much say the mana base is one of the biggest places. Like, there's only so many things. Tribal isn't the greatest type if you're not going for more of a, focused sliver deck where, you just get synergy off of everything. If you're going for a real tribal deck, it's not going to be super powerful just inherently, because it's kind of a hard, clunky thing to do a lot of times. There's a lot of cool synergies like I've shown so far, but kind of a weird one. But, having triomes even if you threw in 1 or 2 extra triomes would be really nice. Cavern of Souls is a really cool synergy piece. It's sort of like our Unclaimed Territory and Secluded Courtyard, where you choose a creature type, it adds a colorless or 1 mana to cast the creature types. So most of the time it's just another, 5 mana source for the deck, which is kind of cool. I'm really surprised these aren't in the main deck either. But Of course, Cavern of Souls has the upside of also making the spell uncounterable, which is kind of the big thing here. But yeah, mostly nothing too crazy here, just a few things to kind of make the land base work a little bit more in your favor. You know, Wizards hasn't been very good with making sure that 5-color mana bases are very great. I know the Eldrazi precon, the Sliver precon were kind of iffy, especially the Sliver precon. So I kind of get that. Even like the Pain Mode deck back in the day is also not super great. But you know, a lot of these cards, even like the Verges, and there's a lot of different things. I just prefer having untapped lands. You know, Magic is speeding up, especially Commander's sped up so fast that even 1 or 2 turns off of what you need can really send you back. Especially, you know, we have so many different things to cast, and you really want to make sure that the stuff you have is a whole bunch of different colors, because we're playing in Wooburg. We've got a lot of different pips of everything because we're playing, you know, with all the different pieces of the color pie. So just kind of a basic thing there. But yeah, just taking one more quick look at the pre-con here. You know, there's quite a few cool cards in here. I really like Kindred Discovery. It's kind of a nice one. You choose a creature type, and the creatures you control ETB or attack. You draw a card. Kind of nice. A good way to get a little bit of extra cards. Or probably just in the basic pre-con, a good way to do that. I talked about it a little bit earlier. Black Market Connections. Beginning of your pre-combat main phase, you choose one or more. You create a treasure token, draw a card, or create a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter with Changeling. All those are really good for this. Even like the last one, which usually isn't picked for a lot of people. It's usually just, you know, the ramp and the card draw. That can be really helpful for the deck. It turns on a lot of our stuff. So that's a really cool card. There's a lot of really awesome synergy in the deck that I really do like. Even weird stuff like Tarian Mauler isn't a super great card. You know, it is a changeling, but whenever an opponent casts a spell, it gets a +1/+1 counter, so this gets really big really fast, which I think is why it's really cool for the deck. Again, Universal Automaton is a 1/1 for 1. This one kind of being the best one that's a changeling, because it's just any mana type. Unsettled Mariner kind of gives our stuff ward. Not quite, it's like pre-ward, where it just says whenever you or a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell, or an ability an opponent controls, counter that spell unless an opponent pays 1. So that's kind of cool, gives a little bit of extra on top of that, of being a changeling. Kind of a cool few cards. Like, there is one interaction spell here, Crib Swap, that is a changeling, where you exile a creature and give them a 1/1. Kind of cool. You know, the exile is nice for what it is. A little overcosted for, you know, a Swords to Plowshares or a Path to Exile that's usually just 1 mana. Having the changeling is kind of nice. And just being an extra card that we can add to sort of our interaction piece. And I kind of talked about it before, but I really like these Lorwyn lands. They're kind of cool, and even adding in the Fabled Passage. Kind of a weird add, Fabled Passage. We don't have a whole lot of basics in here. But, you know, fetches are also going to be a really great thing for this deck, especially if you decide to upgrade the mana base, because there's just so much that you can do with it. And, of course, Surveillance and that sort of thing. You know, as you get more expensive, the fetches and, you know, Triomes. Even if you have 1 or 2 Triomes, I would definitely have a fetch or 2 if you could add it in. That's very much sky's the limit with all of the lands, because there's just so much you can do with it. There's not really any cap to that. You could add in original duels if you wanted, just kind of the biggest thing here. Like I said, I would recommend updating it at least a little bit, you know, getting rid of the Signet lands at the very least, just because I think they're so bad for this deck. But that's kind of the big story. I think the deck by itself kind of has, I think it's fairly well curated for what it is. A lot of cool different things, and they don't shy away from adding the Slayers and that kind of stuff, because they are just kind of good spells. You know, a lot of mana rocks in the deck, pretty much just Soul Ring and Arcane Signet. I guess Realmbreaker kind of counts, but it doesn't add mana. We got Arcane Adaptation, which is just another choose a creature type. All your creatures are that chosen type, which is really cool. Some of these, so there's like Priest of Titania type effects, where you add X mana, where X is the number of things you control of a type. Kind of nice with that. Lots of tribal stuff. You know, there's a bunch of different things that they can do, and you can definitely focus more into stuff. I like stuff like Atla Palani. It's kind of fun, where when eggs die, you reveal cards from the top of your library until you get a creature and put that creature into play, so you kind of replace your stuff. Bernard is really cool. I did actually a deck tech on him already. He gives food and golems, +2/+2 and trample, so it's a really good lord effect. And, you know, when stuff dies, you can make 1/1 food golem tokens of them, so kind of reanimation there. A little cool, you know, bits of value here. You could add like Dracogenesis or Rooftop Storm that allow you to cast specific creature types for free. You can cast Necroduality. It's just sort of a double down effect, or when a non-token zombie enters, you create a token copy of it, which is kind of cool. You can get kind of specific with it. I didn't want to go too far. I like double down because it's kind of a blanketed effect. You still have a lot of different things they can be. So if your creatures end up being one of those types, it just kind of casts a wider net. Kindred Summons is really, really cool. You choose a creature type and then reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal X creature cards of the chosen type, or X is the number of creatures you control of that type. Put them on the battlefield and then shuffle the rest into your library. This is really cool. It's sort of like a distant melody, but instead of card draw, it's just, reveal at the top. It's kind of a Genesis wave effect, which I think is kind of cool. One of the more interesting sort of changeling cards in the deck. But yeah, that about wraps up the deck list review. So there's a lot of cool things. I'm really glad that they did sort of a weird niche, sort of archetype for their deck. I think there's a lot of different things. The first one was coin flips. They did the cats and dogs, one angels, that sort of thing. I think this is one of the more unique ones here. A lot of cool cards. I know people are going to be buying it just for the cool looking arts. Not a horrible deck. If you're looking for value, you're kind of getting it there. Of course, the art cards, and all of the specialty artwork treatments of whatever cards come in the deck usually fetch a huge price on the secondary market. So if you're looking for that and you just want the, one or two of the really cool cards, like Masco Nexus and Morophon, that kind of thing, even the Soaring get specialty art. So if you're looking for that, it might still be worth it. And just the deck in general, it's worth about what you're getting. You're getting a little bit of extra value on top of that, just basically. But kind of a fun deck. I think it'll play out of the box pretty okay, but I think really with those upgrades I specified, you'll see it run a whole lot better. But besides that, I really hope everyone here has enjoyed the video. If you want to take a look at all the other videos I've done, I will leave a link to the playlist of those. I will also leave a link to the Mox field down in the description as well. But besides all that, I will see all of you beautiful people in the next one.